Welcome back to All Strut No Fret on Romeo and Juliet. This is our third video and we're only doing 3 per play, so I obviously will not have the time to walk you through the whole play. Instead, what I hope you'll do is take the guidance I offer here and apply it to your own choice of favourite scenes and speeches. Then come back and let me know in the comments which parts you'd like to look at step by step, more closely together. What we can do with the little time we have is get back to our 5 steps. So first of all, recapping the ones that we've already used and then looking ahead to some slightly more complex ones that we're ready to tackle now. When we were considering Henry V, this first question of who is speaking to whom was a little bit more literal. We really did have a stage full of, let's face it, interchangeable lords, and we were trying to figure out who is the person who is speaking. In Romeo and Juliet, the focus is a lot more on establishing what the relationship is between the speaker and the listener, because once we figure out that dynamic, a lot more things open up. Let's take Juliet as a pivot point, for example. How is she different when she's speaking to her mother from when she's conversing with the nurse, to, of course, Romeo in opposition to Paris? The reason you want to take the time and the trouble to go through the notes in this particular play is that there are just so many references that are embedded in the time that Shakespeare was writing, and that it refers to both imagery and also to the interaction, the banter between people. And if you do take the time to find out what those strange words and references mean, suddenly it's like looking through a series of stained glass windows. What I mean by my comparison with a stained glass window is you don't get everything from it just by looking at the picture. That's the plot, that's the story, the bit you know. But when you look at a stained glass window, you'll only get the most out of it if you see how it's constructed, how it's built, with lines and shadows and the understanding of how light will play on it. Step 3 is that trick for getting at the essence of a complex speech by simply reading over the very last word in each line, because that's where the playwright knew to put what was important so his audience would hear it. But to get us there, we always have to do this first. We have to look at the passage and decide, am I looking at verse or am I looking at prose? Prose looks like an ordinary book. Verse has a capital letter to begin each line all the way down the left-hand side, and the right-hand side is all wriggly. The sample speech we're going to use is one of Juliet's from close to the end of the play, where she's considering what's going to happen to her if and when she takes the potion that is going to give her a sleep that mimics death. So she's processing her fears of taking the sleeping draught and then ultimately deciding to do it. Now, let's imagine that you missed most of this speech because the globe is full of yahoos today and it's all noisy and crowded. Let's imagine you just caught the last word of each of these lines. If that were the case, you would still hear I, smells, earth, mad, distraught, fears, joint, shroud, bone, brains, ghost, body, stay. And then again we get one of those instances where you have instead of a rush of long complicated words, it suddenly gets very, very simple, and we have those 4 monosyllables. I drink to thee. I've been promising that we're going to get to marking up the scansion, and we're finally there. So let's talk about what scansion is and how you can make it work for you. So once again, scansion only matters when we're looking at verse. So if you're looking at a passage in prose, forget all about it. Scansion simply means the rhythm of a line. You can call it the rhythm, the meter, the beat, the pulse. All that really matters is that you look at a word, you can break it down into its syllables and then decide which of those need to be stressed. What do I mean by stressed? It's something we do without even thinking about. Spoken English is a very ratty-tat, gallopy, up and down, clippity-cloppity language. And we are all the time emphasizing some portions of what we say by taking a little longer with them, saying them a little louder, pushing them a little harder with our breath. In one way or another, those are all ways we hear a beat as stressed. And when those stressed and unstressed beats form a pattern, that's when you get poetry. It's the pattern of that rhythm that makes it verse. So we're going to look at two of the most common patterns. Of course, there are many, many others, but all we're going to consider are the iambic and its reverse, the trochaic. To be honest, we'll be spending almost all our time with the iambic rhythm, but you need the trochaic there just so if something goes off-piste and it's not iambic anymore, you have something else to go to figure out what might be going on. So that's why we're looking at trochaic as well. Both of these are two-beat patterns. So the iambic, which is the most common by far, goes light, heavy, dee-dum, dee-dum, dee-dum. Unstressed followed by stressed. The trochaic is simply the reverse of that. You get a heavy beat and then a light one. So it's dum, dee, dum, dee, dum, dee, dum. You might have heard this phrase before, the iambic pentameter. That's because this creates the most fundamental building block to the kind of verse that Shakespeare was writing with most of the time. So the iambic refers to the rhythm, the pentameter to the length. This two-word phrase tells you both about the kind of rhythm in the line and how long it is. So the iambic tells you that the line goes dee-dum, 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 light, heavy, and pentameter tells you that there are 5 stressed beats, 5 heavy beats in each line. And that iambic pentameter is the most dominant form for any line of verse in any of Shakespeare's plays. And here's an example of one. This is thy sheath, their rust, and let me die. Count those heavy beats. There are 5 stressed beats in a line that runs to 10 syllables. Except that isn't strictly true of that line, and it's really important if you know right away that variations are going to happen all the time. I would say that this particular line is more accurately characterized as beginning with what is called a spondee, when you have an extra heavy beat. So you begin with 2 heavy beats before you kick on to the iambic. The other common variation you'll see at the beginning of a line, if it's not an iambic beginning and it's not a spondee, is you see a trochaic reversal. So those first 2 beats are flipped over. So instead of starting light, heavy, you just start off the line heavy, light, and then keep going. Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds. And the way you know if you're seeing a trochaic reversal is you can say rat-a-tat-tat to it. I gave you those notes on the spondee and the trochaic reversal because as you begin to analyse lines, I don't want you to freak out if you're looking for an iambic line and right out of the gate there's something else is going wrong. I just need you to be aware that you're going to see variations and they are identifiable. So in order to really understand the rhythm of a speech, you are going to have to mark up the scansion, and that means putting lines on a page. There are a few different approaches you can take to this. The more formal one is using the cups and saucers that I've demonstrated on the top couple of lines, where you have little loopy lines over the light beats and straight lines over the heavy ones, but it really will work fine if you just want to underline the heavy beats and leave it at that. Remember to keep an eye out for points like in those last 2 lines where words can be expanded or broken up or contracted in order to make the number of syllables fit that 10-beat line. Juliet's soliloquy that opens Act 2, Scene 3, the one that begins "Gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds," is an excellent choice to practice on because it actually has loads of quirky little gentle variations that mix up the iambic pentameter and keep it from being too even. But it will take you some time to have a go at it. It will be very rewarding though, because you get bits like, "Take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun." Now, in that little 4-line block, you can find a couple of points where you have to kind of cram a 2-syllable word into one in order to make it fit the rhythm. But if you speak it out loud, it's surprisingly easy to see where that has to happen. "Take him" would be a spondee, like we spoke of before. "Take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine." So heaven has to be treated as 1 syllable there. that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun. So we've got two secure, even iambic pentameters to finish that bracket. And somehow here we've got to the end without having talked about any of the big stuff. We haven't talked about the balcony scene. We haven't talked about the sword fights and the deaths of Mercutio and Tybalt. We haven't talked about the friar's terrible plan, Juliet's potion, the discovery of her body, the mix-up of the messages, and then the final big showdown in the tomb. And that's all because I wanted to guide you to some of the lesser noticed moments. And that's all for Romeo and Juliet. It's obviously not nearly enough, but in the next group of videos, which will be on 12th Night, we'll finally get to step 5 of my plan, reading aloud. And I'll show you what you do when the lines don't fit that iambic pentameter and see how you can make them work for you anyway. In the meantime, for this play for now, let's just remember to come back to it with fresh eyes and open hearts and see the ways that it tells us about the things we knew it was about, love and romance and desire, but it tells us in so many ways that we have to be open to listening for.